Montana Territory, 1882. The snow had barely melted off the pine needles when Faye Carrigan stepped outside her father's cabin and into the barrel of a revolver. "Do not scream," the man said, voice low and steady. "I ain't gonna hurt you unless you make me." Faye froze, heart slamming against her ribs. Her hands slowly lifted in the cold air, fingers trembling. She took in the man holding her hostage, a tall, broad-shouldered stranger with a shadowed jaw, crooked nose, and eyes the color of wet earth. He wore a dust-stained duster and a Colt on each hip. His boots were caked in old blood and trail dirt. He looked like he had not slept in days. "I do not have anything," she said, voice shaking. "There is no money here." "I know," he muttered, stepping forward and grabbing her arm. "I ain't here for your money." He yanked her toward a tethered horse waiting behind the barn. She struggled. "Then what do you want?" His grip tightened. "Your name's Faye Carrigan. That right?" She flinched. "Yes." "Good," he said, throwing her up onto the saddle like she weighed nothing. "Then you are worth $500 to the marshal down in Helena. Dead or alive. I am not wanted for anything." "I know," he said, swinging up behind her. "But your brother is. And he left your name on a bank note he forged. That is enough for a bounty. And I need it." "You are going to turn me in?" she asked, stunned. "Not you," he said. "Your name." He kicked the horse into motion, and they shot down the trail, leaving behind the cabin, the quiet, the only home she had known since her father died 2 winters ago. She twisted to look at him. "Who are you?" "Zeke Rawlins," he said. "And I am the outlaw dragging you to collect a bounty. You can hate me for it later." By the time the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, her wrists were tied in front of her and they were miles from anything she recognized. The woods had thinned into open prairie. A wind picked up, tugging at her hair. "You could have just taken the note," she said as they dismounted to make camp. Zeke crouched near a patch of dry grass, striking a match to light the kindling. "They would not believe it without the girl who signed it. They want your face. To match the name. Just long enough to hang your brother. I have not seen him in 3 years. Still your blood. You are a coward." He stood, firelight catching the hard lines of his jaw. "I have 2 children," he said suddenly. "Back in Kansas. A boy and girl. Their mother left them last spring. I am all they have. And I cannot feed them on regret." Faye stared at him, stunned into silence. He turned his back and started unpacking the saddlebags. She sat down slowly across the fire from him. Her cheeks burned. "What are their names?" "Josie and Jonah," he said after a beat. "Twins. They are 6. She watched him move around the fire with quiet, practiced hands. There was no cruelty in his face. Just weariness. And something else, guilt, maybe. "They miss you," she said. "I miss them more." The next day was harder. He rode with one hand on the reins and the other on his revolver. She stopped trying to run. Mostly, she just watched him. He did not say much, but when he did, it was never cruel. He offered her water before he drank. He gave her the blanket at night without asking. Once she caught him looking at her hands where the rope had rubbed them raw. He said nothing, but the next stop, he wrapped them in cloth. That night, after they shared a tin of beans, she finally asked, "Why not rob a bank? You would get more than 500. "I tried once," he said. "I was 17. Got shot in the leg and left behind. Never again." "You became a bounty hunter instead?" "I became desperate," he said. By the 4th day, she had stopped calling him a criminal. He had stopped calling her cargo. They rode quietly through a valley filled with green spring grass. She dozed against his chest in the saddle. When she stirred, she found his hand resting lightly over hers. He did not pull it away. That night, she found him sitting alone, staring into the fire, jaw tight. "You miss them tonight?" she asked, kneeling beside him. He nodded. She reached for his hand. You are not a bad man, Zeke. He looked at her then, eyes tired but soft. I took you from your home. But you did not hurt me. You could have. I think about that every night. She looked down. If this ends with me in jail, it won't. She blinked. You said. I changed my mind. Why? He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Because you have not cried once. Because you are brave. And because I have not stopped thinking about what it would feel like to kiss you since the second day. Faye's breath caught in her throat. I will take you to Helena, he said. But not to turn you in. Just to clear your name. I can find another way. She leaned in, heart thudding. Then kiss me. He did. His hand slid to her cheek, slow and careful, like she might vanish. His mouth was warm, rough, honest. She kissed him back with everything she had. When they pulled away, her forehead rested against his. I am still mad at you, she whispered. I know, he murmured. But I think I am falling in love with you anyway. Faye smiled, tears burning her eyes. Then you better start trying to make it right. They rode into the edge of Helena 3 days later, slower than before. Zeke had removed the rope from her wrists outside Bozeman Pass, tossing it into a creek without a word. Since then, she'd ridden her own horse, a quiet bay mare he'd purchased with the last of his coin. When she'd asked what he meant to do for money now, he'd answered only, figure it out. As they neared the outskirt farms, he had her wear a man's coat and hat pulled low, both borrowed from a miner's widow in exchange for splitting a fallen tree on her property. Faye had said nothing at the time, only watched him work until sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, and the wind brought sawdust into her lap. Now, approaching town, she nudged her horse closer to his. Do you still have the forged note? She asked. He shifted in the saddle. Burned it. You said you needed it to clear my name. I'll tell the marshal what I know, he said. If he's worth anything, that'll be enough. And if he isn't? Zeke's jaw moved like he was chewing something bitter. Then I'll get you out another way. They crossed under the wooden sign arched over Main Street. The smell of coal smoke and horse dung drifted through the air, mixing with the scent of fresh bread from the bakery. Wagons rattled past, wheels cutting through packed mud. Men in worn coats tipped hats to ladies in calico, and a pair of boys chased a dog near the livery stable. Zeke led them down a quieter lane beside the courthouse. When they dismounted, he tied the reins loosely and turned to her. You stay outside, he said. If I don't come out in 30 minutes, you ride east. Don't wait. I'm not leaving you in there alone. He met her eyes. You don't owe me anything. That's not why. He didn't answer, just reached up and brushed a windblown strand of hair from her cheek. Then he turned and stepped inside. Faye sat on the railing, staring at the courthouse door. The sun had climbed above the rooftops, warming the wood beneath her. She counted each passing minute by the ticking of the clock tower. 22 minutes passed before the marshal stepped out, followed by Zeke. The man wore a clean vest and a flat expression. He looked Faye over from a distance, then nodded once and re-entered the building. Zeke crossed the yard to her. Your name's clear. They'll be wiring Fort Benton to put out word your brother's to be taken alive. What did you tell him? The truth. And he believed you? Didn't seem like a man who needed much convincing. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. What now? He glanced down the street. I need work. You need someplace safe. Her chest tightened. You're leaving, then? I'm not sure yet. I know a place, she said after a pause. A family my father traded with. They run a mill south of here, near the Blackfoot. They're good people. Zeke looked at her, uncertain. You want me to come? I want you to want to. That night, they camped near the Bitterroot River. He bought a sack of flour, a bit of salt pork, and a used coffee pot, what he could afford after boarding the horses. Faye cooked while he gathered driftwood. When they sat down to eat, she passed him the tin plate without speaking. The moonlight caught the curve of her cheek, softening her features. You ever think about going back east? He asked. She shook her head. There wasn't anything for me back there. Just muddy roads and folks who think silence is a weakness. No one ever taught you to be afraid. I taught myself to survive. He nodded. I think you were meant for more than that. She looked over at him. So were you. A log cracked in the fire. He leaned back on his elbows, watching the stars. When I was a boy, I thought I'd be a preacher. My mother used to say I had a holy voice. You don't talk like a preacher. I don't believe like one anymore. Do you believe in anything? He turned his head to look at her. I'm starting to. The silence that followed was comfortable, stretched between them like a wool blanket. Faye set her plate down. If I asked you to stay for more than a night, would you? Zeke sat upright, studying her. Are you asking? I think I am. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. There's a man in Great Falls who owes me work. But I don't want to go unless you're with me. She hesitated. I can't go far right now. I need to see those mill folks first. Then I'll go with you. Faye smiled, small and certain. All right then. Zeke leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you think we could build something? You and me? She nodded. With time. And patience. He reached out, slow and careful, taking her hand in his. She didn't flinch. We'll do it right, he said. Faye squeezed his fingers. We already started. The trail to the mill followed the northern bend of the Blackfoot River, where the water ran cold and fast over stone. Faye rode slightly ahead, her braid tucked beneath the collar of her borrowed coat, the brim of her hat pulled low against the light rain that had begun to fall. The mare's hooves made soft, wet sounds on the narrowing dirt path. Zeke kept his eyes on the trees. Thick stands of fir and tamarack lined the hillside, their dark trunks slick with moisture. He hadn't spoken since they crossed the timberline, but he watched her with the quiet intensity of a man trying to learn something without asking. You're thinking too loud, she said without turning. He nudged his horse closer. You sure they'll take kindly to me showing up? They owe my father more than they can repay in lumber, she said, glancing at him. And they don't scare easy. He gave a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh. That's so? They kept their mill running through 2 winters with no rail access. Built their own chute to float pine downriver. If you're looking for soft hands and fragile feelings, you're riding the wrong direction. I'm not looking for soft. That's good, she said. Because there's nothing soft about the woman you dragged out of the mountains. The mill came into view around a bend, a long, low structure of hand-hewn logs with a water wheel churning slow and steady at its side. Smoke curled from a stone chimney. A boy no older than 12 paused from stacking firewood to watch them approach, then turned and ran toward the main building. By the time they dismounted, a tall woman in a patched canvas apron stood on the porch. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and her arms bore the wiry strength of someone who split her own kindling. You Carrigan's girl? The woman called. Faye stepped forward, nodding once. He passed 2 winters ago. The woman's face softened. He was a hard man. But he never cheated us. He taught me not to offer what I couldn't back with work. The woman looked at Zeke next, gaze sharp. And him? Zeke Rawlins, he said. I'm not here for charity. Good, the woman said. We don't give it. Inside, the mill house was warm with the scent of damp sawdust and bread baking. A young girl with ink-stained fingers sat at a table, copying letters from a tattered primer. She looked up, then returned to her work without a word. You'll sleep in the loft, the woman said to Faye. And him, if he's worth his salt, can help my brother on the south felling. Zeke met her eyes. I'll work clean and quiet. That night, after supper, Faye stood outside the bunkhouse with her arms crossed against the chill. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of moss and iron. Zeke leaned against the split rail fence, watching the tree line. You ever think about building something permanent? She asked. He didn't answer right away. I used to think staying in one place would make me a target. And now? Now I think it might make me a man worth something. She stepped closer, her boots brushing damp grass. I don't need saving, Zeke. He looked over at her, eyes level. I know that. But I want choosing, she said. I want someone to look at me and want to stay. I'm looking, he said. And I'm staying. She took his hand, rough and calloused, and held it between both of hers. No more running? She asked. No more dragging women down trails they didn't ask to follow, he said. She smiled, just once. You going to tell Josie and Jonah about me? He nodded. If you want them to know. I do. He studied her face in the moonlight, the way her chin lifted, steady and unflinching. I think they'd like you, he said. You tell the truth even when it's ugly. I learned that from a man who tried to sell me but ended up giving me his heart. He didn't kiss her, not then. He just stood with her in the dark, her hand in his, both of them quiet in the way only people who've survived something can be. And when she leaned against him, he wrapped his arm around her and held on. Not in apology, not in fear but in promise. The spring thaw came fast that year, breaking the ice off the river in long, groaning sheets. Water ran high and fast past the mill, and the wheel turned heavier with the current. The air carried the scent of wet bark and tilled earth, and the woods echoed with the first woodpeckers of the season. Zeke worked beside the mill owner's brother most days, hauling pine to the chute and clearing debris after each run. His palms blistered the first week, but he said nothing. Faye saw the raw skin when he wiped sweat from his brow, and the way he winced when the axe handle caught rough. You're not from timber country, she said one evening as he washed his hands in the creek. Not exactly, he answered, drying them on a length of old linen. Spent more time breaking horses than felling trees. You miss it? He paused, then shook his head. I miss certain things. The sound of hooves on dry grass. The way a horse knows more than most men. Faye crouched beside him, scooping water to rinse her wrists. I think I miss the quiet of it. My father let the stock graze down near the cottonwoods, and sometimes I just sit in the tall weeds and listen. You ever think about keeping stock again? Wouldn't mind a few goats. Maybe chickens, if they don't wander too far. He looked at her. You ever want something bigger? She stood and brushed her palms against her skirt. I want a place I don't have to leave. That night, the girl who spent her days copying letters from the primer offered to lend Faye a book worn and faded, but whole. Faye accepted it with quiet thanks, and read it by lantern light, while Zeke repaired the handle of the draw knife with a strip of rawhide and a wood pin. You read much as a boy? She asked, eyes still on the page. Some. Mostly wanted to know how to fix things. Tools. Fences. Engines. You ever read for yourself? He tied off the last knot and tested the grip. I read a sermon once that made me cry. She closed the book, watching his face. You ever cry since? Only when I thought I'd lost something I never deserved. She leaned forward. You didn't lose me. I know that now. He set the knife aside and met her gaze. I've been thinking about writing to the twins. She waited. Telling them I found someone who makes the world quieter. Like I can carry it better. Then you should write, she said. They deserve to know that about you. He looked down at his hands. They don't know me anymore, Faye. Then start with your name. That's all a child needs at first. Just to remember who you are. The next morning, she brought him a folded piece of paper and a stub of graphite. She didn't say anything, only left it by the cot before heading out to help in the cookhouse. When she returned, the page sat filled with careful, slanted script. He handed it to her. Would you read it before I send it? She did, slowly, lips moving without sound. When she finished, she looked up. You told them the truth. He nodded. I didn't want to lie about what I'd done. You didn't hide what you're trying to be either. He folded the page again and slid it into his coat. I don't think I could have written it before I met you. Later that week, The mill owner's brother offered Zeke permanent work. He didn't answer right away. Faye found him at the edge of the river, watching the water turn. "You're thinking about Kansas," she said. "I'm thinking about what kind of man they'd see if I showed up now. You don't have to choose between them in here." He glanced at her. "You'd come with me? If they'll have me. If you want me beside you." He took her hand. "I do." She nodded once. "Then let's go when the road dries. You can work here till then. I'll sew up some linens and mend what we can carry." He touched her cheek, rough thumb grazing the soft skin below her eye. "Faye," he said, voice low, "I think I love you more because you never asked me to be anything but honest. I think I love you because you've never looked away." He kissed her then, not like the first time, not like he might lose her, but like she already belonged. And this time, she kissed him back with the certainty of someone who knew where she was going. The rains passed by late May, drying the last of the ruts along the wagon road south. Faye pressed her palm against the packed earth outside the mill house that morning, rising with a quiet nod. "It's ready," she said. Zeke stood beside the mule-drawn cart they'd bartered for in exchange for 3 cords of split pine, checking the harness again. "We can make the crossing at Sun River before dark if we don't stop long." She climbed up beside him, their few belongings stowed behind them, a canvas sack of flour, a coil of rope, a rolled quilt she'd stitched from scraps the Mill family gave her. The letter to Josie and Jonas sat folded in the inside pocket of his coat, addressed and sealed with melted pine sap. They passed fields sprouting green shoots and cabins with smoke curling from stone chimneys. The land softened as they left the mountains behind, hills folding into one another like crumpled linen. A red-winged blackbird darted from the brush, wings flashing bright against the afternoon hush. Zeke tapped the reins. "There's something I haven't said." Faye didn't turn. "Go on." "I've spent most of my life thinking folks only stayed because they were trapped. Or owed something. But you think I stayed out of debt? I think you stayed because you wanted to. And that's more than I thought I'd ever deserve." She reached down and laced her fingers through his as they rode. At a farmstead near Cascade, a woman with a broad-brimmed hat and 3 barefoot children offered a bed of straw in the barn and a bowl of stew in exchange for Faye mending a torn apron. Zeke helped the oldest boy shoe a mule that kept throwing its left hind, and when dusk fell, they sat by an open window where the breeze carried in the scent of lilac and damp earth. Faye rested her chin on her arms. "You ever wonder what it'd be like to have a home and never have to leave it?" Zeke leaned his head back, the lantern glow catching the lines near his mouth. "I used to think about where I'd go next. Now I think about where I want to end up." "Where is that?" He looked at her steady. "Anywhere you are." They reached Fort Shaw by early June. The postmaster agreed to send the letter east with the next dispatch. Zeke stood outside the office longer than necessary, eyes on the horizon, until Faye touched his elbow. "They'll read it," she said. "And they'll remember your voice." He nodded once and stepped down from the porch. They traveled another 3 days past Belt Creek, turning east where the cottonwoods grew thick along the coulees. At a rise overlooking the plain, Zeke brought the mule to a halt. Below them sat a small homestead, long abandoned house leaning but not fallen, a broken gate half open on rusted hinges, and a windmill missing 2 blades. The land stretched wide and uncut. He tilted his head toward it. "It's been empty since before the war. I asked after it in Helena. Fella down at the land office said it was forfeited when the last owner died without kin. It's claimable." Faye shaded her eyes. "Has a good well, by the look of it. Roof needs patching. Got a fence line started. And the soil looks dark. Might hold a garden." He handed her the reins. "Should we see the inside?" They walked the last stretch, boots kicking dry grass. The door creaked when she pushed it open, light streaming in across the worn floorboards. A stove stood in the corner, rusted but solid. Dust hung in the air like ash. She turned in the doorway. "It'll take work." Zeke stepped in behind her. "I've got 2 hands." She smiled. "I've got the rest." They spent the next weeks repairing what they could with what they had. The first night after cleaning out the hearth, they slept on the floor wrapped in the patchwork quilt, her back to his chest, the wind whistling through a crack near the eaves. By the third day, he'd patched the roof with cedar shakes and she'd cleared the weeds from behind the house to make room for onions and sage. They built a coop from driftwood and wire, and when he returned one afternoon with 2 hens tucked in a grain sack, she kissed his cheek and laughed for the first time he'd ever heard. They didn't talk about forever in grand words. They just planted rows and hauled water and stacked firewood. On the 4th Sunday, Zeke rode into town and came back with a ring carved from antler and a piece of paper signed by the circuit preacher. He didn't kneel when he gave it to her, just held it out like something he'd carried a long time. She slid it on her finger and kissed him slow and sure and said, "Now we've got something that's ours." He wrote weekly to Josie and Jonah, and by mid-autumn, he had a reply scrawled in large, uneven letters signed by both. They were well. They remembered the story he used to tell about the wild horse with one white eye. They wanted to meet the woman he wrote about. That winter, they built a second cot near the stove, just in case. In the morning, Faye fed the hens while Zeke split kindling. They didn't need much to be warm. She'd started weaving a rug from old flour sacks. He carved a small horse from pine and left it on the windowsill for the twins. When snow fell, it buried the earth in silence, and they sat by the fire with their knees touching, hands clasped between them. "I never thought peace would feel like this," he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Like what?" "Like someone breathing beside you. Nothing more. Nothing less." She closed her eyes. "Then we did it right." And he pressed his lips to her hair and whispered, "We did."